I agreed to let my father and his new wife live in my house when they were facing financial difficulties. However, within a month, his wife approached me to discuss the possibility of me paying rent. Life has always been challenging for me. Beginning from the day I was born, my mother died in childbirth at the hospital, and I was left in the care of my father. Tragically, he blamed me, just an infant at the time, for her death. Throughout my childhood, not a day passed without my father harshly reminding me that I was the reason for my mother's absence. He constantly emphasized that my birth resulted in the loss of his most cherished love, and often mentioned that he never wanted me. He insisted that since my arrival had come at such a steep personal cost, I was obligated to live a life worthy of the sacrifice, or else my mother's death would have been for nothing. Growing up with this heavy burden was crushing. I was too young to grasp the full scope of grief, loss, and resentment. I desperately needed my mother, but instead, I had a father who treated me as though I was the root of all his problems. He should have been my guardian and support, but he became a constant reminder of how unwanted I was. His presence not only lacked the warmth of parental love, but was filled with unrelenting anger and blame directed at me for simply existing. This environment fostered profound loneliness and isolation during my childhood. While other children had parents who supported and comforted them, I felt like I was perpetually tiptoeing around, trying not to provoke further resentment from him. It wasn't just the absence of affection that was painful, it was also the palpable presence of resentment towards an aspect of myself that I could never change: my very existence. Despite his harshness, I struggled to understand and even forgive my father's pain, knowing that he was irrevocably broken by my mother's death. But understanding his suffering didn't ease the impact of his cruel words. I was just a child trying to find a sense of belonging in a world that often seemed hostile and unwelcoming. Yet, beneath all the hurt, I still harbored a deep desire for his approval and love. I clung to hope that I might eventually make him proud. Whenever I achieved good grades, I would eagerly present them to him, hoping for even the smallest acknowledgement or a sign of pride. But each time, he would dismiss my efforts, emphasizing that my achievements were not exceptional and reminding me that I still hadn't met his high expectations. This indifference made it clear that no matter my accomplishments, they would never be enough to satisfy him. Outside of academics, any interest I expressed in sports or other activities was immediately dismissed. He made it clear that my only focus should be on my studies, to hasten the day I could leave his home. Such words only reinforced the idea that I was more of a burden than a son to him. While my friends enjoyed encouragement from their parents, I was reminded constantly that I was merely a temporary occupant in his life, expected to conform to his rules or face expulsion. Even weekends, which should have been a time for relaxation and fun, were overshadowed by his restrictions and rants if I expressed a desire to spend time with friends. This unyielding control and lack of support starkly contrasted with the loving, nurturing environments my peers experienced, highlighting just how isolated and controlled my own life was under his roof. Growing up, my father often admonished me about spending money, even for simple joys like visiting a friend or taking a stroll in the park. His stern lectures, emphasizing his hard work to fund my education, made me feel guilty about desiring time with friends. He seemed to believe that anything bringing me happiness was trivial or wasteful. One particularly stark memory is from my 14th birthday, a day most children eagerly anticipate, planning celebrations with friends. For me, however, it was a day of anxiety. Despite my hopes for a change, when I suggested a movie outing with friends followed by pizza, my father erupted. He harshly reminded me that my birthday also marked the anniversary of my mother's passing. He declared it the worst day of the year, one that should never be celebrated. Consequently, I never again celebrated my birthday with friends. This pattern of rejection and critical remarks from my father deeply affected me. It felt like navigating a minefield, where any misstep could provoke his wrath. Gradually, I withdrew into myself, hiding my aspirations and ceasing to seek his approval, knowing it would only lead to more pain. Despite these challenges, I channeled my energies into my studies, determined to forge a path to independence. This dedication bore fruit when I received a full scholarship to a prestigious university. Receiving that acceptance letter was a profound moment of relief and pride for me. Moving out meant escaping the oppressive environment of my father's home and starting a new chapter on my own terms. College was a transformative period. I thrived, exploring life as a typical young adult, something that had been previously out of reach. I embraced freedom, ignored attempts by my father to exert control from afar, and started making decisions for myself. I actively participated in campus life, attending parties, joining clubs, and making lifelong friends. It was a time of personal growth and joy. It was also during this period that I met Sophia, my girlfriend. Our connection was instant and profound. We shared similar ambitions and an understanding that transcended the usual. Sophia had a remarkable ability to be present without the need for constant conversation, allowing me to be introspective without feeling isolated. This quality in our relationship helped me heal from my past, as she was the first person who made me feel unburdened by guilt or expectation. Together, we enjoyed the simplicity of being ourselves, whether we were discussing our future plans or enjoying quiet moments side by side. This journey through adversity into a life filled with autonomy and love taught me the importance of self-reliance and the value of following one's own path. For many years, I bore a heavy weight that had settled so deeply into my life, I almost couldn't see it as out of the ordinary. It took Sophia's clarity to recognize how profoundly it was affecting me. She highlighted how unfair it was that my father had blamed me for my mother's passing, a burden no child should carry. She suggested therapy, a step I hadn't considered before, as my father's harsh words had deeply rooted themselves in my psyche, making me unaware that there could be an escape from their influence. Therapy turned out to be a life-changing journey. Initially, it was challenging to face the realities of my childhood and the trauma I had endured. The process of breaking down the harmful beliefs I had internalized required immense courage. Through therapy, I began to see the flaws in my father's perspective and realized I deserved much better. I learned that the blame for my mother's death was not mine to carry, and that the anger and bitterness were my father's issues, not mine. As I healed, I found myself becoming angrier with my father. Years of suppressed resentment surfaced as I no longer sought his approval or strived to be the child he wanted, all the while carrying the guilt he imposed on me. This realization that his expectations and grief were not mine to satisfy or bear made it difficult to maintain a relationship with him. During my college years, our interactions were sparse and strained. I found myself snapping at him, unable to mask my growing bitterness. The breaking point came unexpectedly during a heated exchange when I confronted him about the years of blame and its impact on my mental health. I asserted that I would no longer be his scapegoat and demanded respect and dignity, threatening to cut ties permanently if things didn't change. He was taken aback, and while he didn't apologize, he didn't deny my accusations either. After that, I noticed a slight change in his demeanor. He seemed to make an effort to be less harsh, though it was a small step towards mending a deeply strained relationship. Despite the slight improvement in his behavior, the years of pain and resentment were not easily forgotten. While I appreciated his efforts, the damage was significant, and complete repair seemed uncertain. Over time, my anger and guilt diminished as I accepted that while the past couldn't be changed, I could choose how it influenced my future. Sophia's unwavering support was instrumental in this realization, helping me see my own worth and right to happiness. Recently, my father remarried in a quiet ceremony, and despite our past, I chose to attend with Sophia to offer our support. I hoped that this new chapter might bring positive changes in him. However, a month into his marriage, he called me in a panic over his financial missteps and impending eviction, revealing that he hadn't shared this with his new wife to avoid conflict. His first request was for me to cover his rent. This ongoing saga with my father continues to challenge me, but with Sophia's support, I navigate through, focusing on building a life defined by love, respect, and happiness, not by the shadows of the past. Despite having the resources, I initially refused to help because I did not want to be seen as just a financial safety net, especially considering our complex history. I've worked diligently to establish the life I lead now, and I was cautious about setting a precedent that would allow him to depend on me financially whenever he faced difficulties. However, after discussing it with my friend Sophia, I began to feel a pang of guilt. It dawned on me that I might be acting too harshly, and after all, He was still my father and perhaps genuinely in need. So, I reached out to my dad again and proposed a middle ground. I made it clear that I wouldn't pay his rent, but I offered to let him and his wife, Mila, stay with me in my home temporarily. Living alone, I had ample space to accommodate them. This arrangement, I explained, would allow them time to save up and find a place of their own. Despite our rocky past, I felt this was the right thing to do. I emphasized that this setup was temporary and expected him to actively work towards regaining his independence. My dad pondered over my offer but eventually agreed. Within 3 weeks, he and Mila moved in. I prepared a guest room for them, and the initial month was a period of adaptation for everyone involved. Having not lived with my father for many years, and both of us having changed significantly, the adjustment was challenging. I was no longer the teenager who silently absorbed his criticisms. I was an adult with my own life and habits. Regrettably, it didn't take long for his old habits to re-emerge. He started to critique my lifestyle and daily choices as if no time had passed. This time, however, I stood firm. I made it clear that while he was under my roof, he had no right to judge or control my life. I was resolute but calm. I refused to let him dictate how I should live. This stance did not sit well with his wife, Mila. On occasion, she would insist that I needed to show more respect for my father, citing his sacrifices. I knew the reality of our past, a reality she was partly unaware of. I maintained my respect for him, but I was not willing to let his presence undermine my autonomy. I opted to remain silent whenever Mila commented, avoiding unnecessary conflicts. I recognized that cohabiting would be difficult, but I hoped we could eventually find a way to live together with minimal friction. However, one evening after a long day at work, I returned home to find a mess, dishes piled high in the kitchen, and my father lounging with Mila, watching TV. Frustrated, I reminded him of his responsibilities in maintaining our shared home. He responded in that all too familiar condescending tone, which only reinforced my resolve to not revert to old patterns. Living with my father again was challenging, but I was determined to protect my space and well-being. I grew up under the sole care of my father after my mom passed away. So when he reproached me for not doing more around the house, it struck a nerve. He told me, as he sat on my couch and watched my TV, that I should be able to handle the dishes myself. I was furious and retorted, highlighting the irony of him living in my house rent-free and yet demanding more from me. My response left him speechless, and a heavy silence filled the room. I half expected him to storm out, but he stayed, likely because he had no other place to go. The tension was palpable as I walked away, slamming the kitchen door behind me. The next morning, I encountered Mila, my dad's wife, in the kitchen. She expressed how my words had hurt my dad, claiming he had used his savings to help buy my house. This was news to me. I had purchased my home with my earnings, without any financial assistance from him since college. Mila insisted that I owed it to my dad to start paying them rent, as he had supposedly made significant financial sacrifices for me. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of her claims. When I corrected her, revealing that my dad had contributed nothing financially, the shock on her face was evident. After our conversation, Mila realized the truth and soon moved out. Later, when my dad learned about our talk, he accused me of sabotaging his relationship with Mila by being truthful. He felt diminished and insisted that I should have perpetuated his lie to keep the peace. It was a frustrating reminder of the years I felt blamed for things beyond my control. Despite offering them a place in my home, I was met with blame instead of gratitude. It was clear that the responsibility for the misunderstandings and tensions lay with him, not me. My refusal to endorse his falsehoods marked a turning point, emphasizing my independence and the value of honesty in our strained relationship. After numerous exhausting battles and ceaseless manipulation from my father, I reached my breaking point. I told him candidly that I could no longer tolerate the strain his presence put on my mental health. It was crucial for me to set firm boundaries to safeguard my own well-being. So with a heavy heart, I asked him to pack his belongings and leave the next day. Although he protested, citing his lack of alternative accommodations and pleading for more time, I stood firm in my decision to have him move out the following morning. Since then, my father has frequently contacted me, lamenting that my actions have wrecked his life and his marriage. He blames me for the souring of his relationship with his wife, Mila, claiming that a devoted son would never evict his own parent. His words only reinforced my resolve, as I understood the necessity of removing myself from his toxic influence. Encouraged by the support of others who recognized the trauma I endured during my upbringing, I decided it was time Mila knew the full extent of my father's deceit. We eventually had a candid discussion where I detailed the emotional torment I had suffered and its profound impacts on me. To her astonishment, it became clear that my father had depicted himself very differently to her, portraying a sacrificial, single father figure. I shared how throughout my childhood, I was unjustly held accountable for my mother's passing, and how, as an adult, I strove to forge a path to independence and success. Mila was sympathetic and expressed dismay upon learning about my father's financial ruin due to gambling, a secret he had kept even from her. She admitted feeling deceived, especially when she discovered that his claims of financial contributions to my home were utterly false. As we parted, Mila resolved to take some time to reflect on her relationship with my father, appreciating the insights I had provided. Over the past 5 months, I have entirely severed ties with my father to focus on my recovery and emotional health. The clarity and relief that followed have been transformative. My girlfriend, Sophia, has been a pillar of support, helping me navigate through these changes. With her by my side, I am embracing a renewed sense of stability and focusing on building a fulfilling life.